We have all gotten used to the fact that KGB arrests are like a cat shoving its ass in your face at the most random times of the day. No one was immune. But it was one thing to arrest people who were supposedly dangerous to the authorities and the regime. We all know stories like that. But surely even the Soviet bastards wouldn't arrest people over a picture of a tree in a newspaper, right? Well, that's exactly what happened in Kiev on May 5th, 1937, when two people were arrested for publishing material in a communist newspaper. These unfortunate souls were Vsevolod Salamander, a photographer, and Volodymyr Tsvetnarovsky, a retoucher. Let me show you these highly dangerous materials and you try to guess what exactly outraged the Soviet authorities so much. Tough, huh? Let me help you out as a professional artist, of course. Oh, now we can see. It's Trotsky, a Soviet traitor hiding in the branches of a tree. Can you imagine? Yes, someone in the USSR government actually saw the face of one of the Soviet Union's founders, Leon Trotsky, hidden in this photo. I know many of you are lucky enough not to be familiar with Soviet history, and honestly, I envy you. But here's what you need to know for now. Trotsky was one of the founders of the USSR. Then, after a falling out with Stalin, he was declared an enemy of the people, branded a traitor, and forced to live in exile outside the Union. Given how demonized his image was, it's not surprising that someone thought they saw his face in the tree branches, or even suspected it had been placed there intentionally. That's why the KGB preemptively arrested photographer Vsevolod and retoucher Volodymyr. Then, as objectively as possible, they sent the photo and its negatives for examination. The goal? To determine exactly when Trotsky's face had been inserted into the image. Had the photographer intentionally snapped branches like a fool to create the illusion of the enemy's face, or had the retoucher subtly manipulated an ordinary photo to make the face appear? Yes, in case you didn't know, photo retouching existed back then, and artists did it with their hands, no Photoshop with AI for you. There are plenty of examples of such political retouching from the Soviet era if you're interested. But this so-called examination quickly turned into a circus. First, the photo expert studied the trees, and what do you think? He spotted Trotsky's face but in entirely different part of the picture. Of course, the KGB guys pulled him aside and said, no, Trotsky is right here. Finally, the expert obediently concluded that no face appeared in the negatives, so it had to be the retoucher's work. The KGB officially interrogated Volodymyr Tsvetnarovsky 3 times, and each time our hero denied deliberately driving the face of a Soviet enemy in the photo. Of course, the authorities dug up some dirt on him to keep our hero behind bars longer. They reminded him of his brother who was part of a white army, the fact that our hero hadn't subscribed to the Running Fish channel, and that once while retouching photos of political figures at work he had called them idiots. Another time, while working on a panoramic shot of an ugly car repair plant in Kiev, Tsvetnarovsky failed to paint over the silhouettes of tanks in the far away distance. What if a foreign spy bought a newspaper, saw the tanks and figured out the location of the Soviet military plant, and then an American bomb would hit the target? Ironically though, it was a Russian bomb that eventually hit the place not so long ago. In short, Volodymyr spent 6 months in prison before being released. Yes, this was a rare case where the court said, no comrades, we don't know, there is little evidence, it's a murky case, let the guy go. But just in case, make him sign a paper not to leave the city. In short, our hero was lucky. Usually the authorities simply threw such people behind bars, as they did in Kiev in 1948. And this time it wasn't about painted trees, but about a challenge to Lenin's spirit, and I'm not even joking. There was a certain Ilya Gorban, a typical sculptor of that time, who lived in Bila Tserkva, it's near Kiev. One day at work he started talking to a colleague about ghosts, whether they were real or just fiction and nonsense, you know, a typical talking. However, this colleague gave Ilya a book of spirits to read, which was kind of Bible of spiritualism in those days. Grateful for the gift, he eventually started holding seances with plates, whether out of belief in the mystical or just for fun. Let me explain how it worked. First of all, you have to drink, because let's be honest, doing this sober is a terrible idea. Then you sit at a table, maybe with others, light some candles and place a piece of paper in the middle. The paper has letters, numbers and the words yes and no arranged in a circle. You put a plate with an arrow on top of the paper and start moving it around. Basically, it's a homemade Ouija board. Of course, Ilya didn't hold the seances alone. His sister Vera joined him, and after a while so did his beloved Olga. Together they summoned all sorts of people: Michelangelo, Lenin, that bastard Trotsky again, Stalin's wife, and a bunch of others we don't really care about. Lenin, in the form of a ghost, for example, told our little cultists that the Soviet government would soon collapse and that America would help. Unfortunately, that was a lie, and the fucking Union lived on for many years. He also doubted Stalin's genius, suggesting that man was a bit of a dope. At the final meeting, our heroes and a spirit even discussed the latest monetary reform. Smart people in a way, but not smart enough to step back and avoid falling into the KGB's clutches. The thing is, I lied to you. Or rather, I left something out. Ilya, Vera, and Olga weren't the only members of this spiritual club. There was also a certain Varvara Shelest, and there is a very good chance she was a KGB agent or a snitch. In fact, it was probably Varvara who betrayed them. Of course, this might seem absurd to you, but the investigation into this case actually happened. It lasted 7 days, and in the end our heroes were convicted under charges of anti-Soviet propaganda, agitation, and participation in a counter-revolutionary organization. Ilya, as the leader of the group, was sentenced to 25 years in prison, while the women received slightly shorter sentences of 10 years. And the fact that the Soviet government officially denied God and all sorts of mystical things did not prevent them from imprisoning people. By the way, Ilya was sent far away to Russia, to the Ob camp. There, like many prisoners, he likely spent his days building a railroad until he died in 1950 at the age of 47. And if you want to learn about the Soviet Union's human experiments and other horrific secrets, watch this video.